Welcome to Debunking Myths about DSO Affiliations with my friend Nacho, sponsor. Fellow agitator like myself, likes to get people to think about the next step in their career. Brannon Moncrief from McLerran. As we have people kind of filtering in here, Brannon live, people will get a chance to watch this recording. Just share with our audience, orient them like what you do in your daily life to help dentist dreams come true, and avoid screams. Avoid screams. It's close to Halloween season. So give us just a minute or two on what you do.
Hi, what's up, Paul? Always good to see you. I'm Brannon Moncrief, Principal CEO of McLerran and Associates, and we provide sell-side advisory to large practice owners that are considering monetizing their business. So whether you're looking to sell your practice to another clinician or monetize your practice by pursuing a DSO affiliation or a private equity partnership, I really look at it as our job to educate and empower dentists to make good decisions with the future of their business. And, that always starts with quantifying what is your practice worth, private buyer versus DSO, what are the options available to you? And once you're educated, you understand your options and what your business is worth. We shepherd you down whatever path you decide to go down. And we're your sell-side advisor. Our job is to take your practice to market if and when it makes sense, find the right fit, negotiate the right deal structure, and maximize the economic outcome.
I love that, Brad. I mean, to teach you how to talk dentist, every day we're giving patients their options to decide whether they come in and say, I don't want to hear about dental implants. I say, too bad. I got to tell you about dental implants. It's the dental law, I tell them. You don't have to choose dental implants. So maybe one of these themes of tonight is know your options, know about both, know about what a DSO sales like, know about what a private practice sales like. If you want to connect with our awesome sponsor, Brannon, and his team, you can email transitions@dentalnachos.com. You can also text McLerran, McLerran, to 215-543-6454. I see some of the people in the chat who I know. I won't violate Zoom HIPAA, Brannon, here, especially on a sensitive topic like selling practices, but my team member will also put a link in the chat that you can fill out. And just to kind of help dentists for a second, Brannon, you talk all the time to dentists who are just starting out this process. What's the first call like? If someone's like, hey, I got to talk to Brannon and his team, are they going to make me sign up for something tomorrow? Do I have to give up my practice the next day? Just tell us about that first contact with your team.
Super casual, confidential and casual. That's how we try to keep the initial call. It's basically a 30-minute, what we call a discovery call, just to get to know each other. I want to learn a little bit about your why, what season of life are you in? What season of your career are you in? What is your runway to eventually retiring or exiting your business? And then I want to know a little bit about the business, revenue, number of doctors, type of patient base, service mix, number of operatories, things of that nature. So we can really quantify, does it make sense to do a deep dive? Does it make sense to do an EBIT analysis, to do a full-blown valuation and quantify the options? Or, are you not quite ready and it makes sense to just hit pause on that conversation and pick it up, when the time is right? So no obligation. There's no fee for that initial consultation, and we take a very soft sell approach to everything we do. It's more a consultative, objective approach than it is, trying to pitch you on taking your practice to market ASAP. We're blessed to be very busy, so I don't need to rush anybody to go to market.
I think that makes sense, and it mirrors what we do in dentistry. I tell patients all the time, when you are ready to move forward, I will be ready to help you. I just want you to have this information so you can make the best decision for you. So look at that, Brannon. A lot of similarities between brokers and dentists, right? A lot of similarities between brokers and dentists. I want to share before we get started on our questions and our theme. If you want to rewatch this webinar, listen to it again, watch it again, just text recording to 215-543-6454. So out of my childhood, Brannon, He-Man and Skeletor, we're talking about myths. Myth number one, DSOs are evil. You're here to debunk myths. A lot of people say DSOs are evil. Just today, I want to make sure I get the right context for this. I don't know if you had the time. I said, when does it make sense to sell to a DSO? When does it not make sense? And there are dentists out there says, if you want to ruin your legacy, if you want to ruin dentistry. So this is the time. Give us the debunking myths DSOs are evil.
Look, this is obviously a lightning rod topic. Every time it comes up in the group, there are those that say, hey, I've had a good experience. The DSO I partnered with is awesome. And there are others that say, selling to a DSO is the worst mistake you'll ever make. It's an absolutely terrible idea. I mean, the reality is this: there are good DSOs and bad DSOs, just like there are good clinicians, good practice owners, and bad clinicians and bad practice owners. So I don't believe that DSOs are evil, but they're not all created equal. So you really need to get educated regarding your options, identify your why, and understand what you're looking for, and if that's actually available in the marketplace, if and when you're going to go down the DSO path. You've got to create optionality. You've got to vet the buyers, or you risk making a mistake. And look, there are some horror stories out there, and you've heard some of them. I've heard some of them. Our clients have not had that experience because of how careful we are about how we navigate the process, how we educate our clients, and how we vet the DSOs we allow to sit at the table and bid on our practices. But there's been far more dentists that have had positive experiences with DSOs than negative. But if you've had a positive experience, you don't need to go online and brag about it, or subject yourself to, some of the comments that your peers will make if you say anything nice about the DSO that you partnered with.
I want to share two things, but first, I want you to help our audience. What is a DSO to you? If someone's just like looking at, like, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, just to catch people up. What is a DSO to you? There's small ones, there's medium ones, there's large ones. So just to help our audience compare and contrast, what's a DSO to you?
The technical definition of a DSO is dental service organization, and you could own one practice or 1,600 practices. It simply means that there's a legal distinction where you've broken the business into two entities: a doctor-owned entity that owns the clinical records of the practice, and then a business entity that essentially controls all the other assets and provides services to the business. But when I talk about DSOs, when we talk about the types of DSOs that acquire our clients' practices, we're talking about DSOs that typically utilize a partnership model. The doctor's going to have skin in the game and equity, whether at the practice level, the DSO level, or both. They're not going to rebrand the practice. They're not going to interrupt the culture. They're not going to try to reinvent the wheel. They're not going to interrupt the doctor's clinical autonomy. The doctor's still going to have a lot of operational autonomy. You've heard kind of the moniker out there, IDSO, invisible DSO. I think that's more of kind of a marketing term than reality. But for lack of a better acronym, I would say that that's, kind of accurate as to the type of DSOs that partner with our clients.
I love that, Brandon. Also, I was looking at my phone. I want to read something to you because I think you really like it. I was in my town Facebook group yesterday, and they said, I want to go to a dentist who doesn't push x-rays. So what do brokers and dentists have in common? A lot of people say not so nice things about us at times, right? So when someone stops and says something nice about a dentist, I notice. And Eric Appley's from Nachos, who partnered with a DSO, he said, back in 2022, I was going to sell my offices to a DSO. I spent a couple months thinking I can do it on my own. I got a few calls from DSOs. Then one of my friends let me know that he used a broker that got him a ton of extra value, higher EBITDA. We negotiated with several DSOs. By the time I closed, I had an extra 1 million in value compared to the other initial offers. So just talk to our audience for a second, not about Brannon Moncrief, but in brokers in general. Good brokers, responsible brokers. For those people watching thinking, I don't want to pay the commission, I can do it on my own. One of their colleagues just shared they came out $1 million ahead. Just kind of unpack that for us.
So unfortunately, dentists kind of have the reputation of, stepping over dimes to pick up pennies, if you will. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about, not hiring a broker versus hiring a broker. Yes, we're going to charge a commission. Yes, we make a nice living. But if we do our job well, you're going to fetch a 20 to 25% premium comparative to attempting to negotiate with those same DSOs on your own. And the reason for that is multifaceted, but a large part of it is because you as a dentist, you own one practice, you're good for one deal. Us as a broker, we're good for
Yeah.
hundreds of deals. So they are going to treat you different if you walk in the door with us than if you walk in the door alone. They also know that if you're working with us, they're going to be in a highly competitive situation. They're going to be sitting at a table full of bidders. And as a result, we're going to drive up the economics and we're going to negotiate a better deal structure so they can't take advantage of you. They can't play games. And then number three is controlling the narrative regarding EBITDA. The number one way that DSOs are opportunistic is to dangle the carrot of a sexy EBITDA multiple, but undercut you on your EBITDA because EBITDA can be somewhat subjective. It shouldn't be. In my eyes, it's objective, but in the DSO world, it's subjective. And the easiest way to manipulate valuation is to manipulate EBITDA. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, I want to save the 6% or whatever the broker is going to charge because that's going to come off my bottom line. But the reality is it's costing you money by not paying that commission. Not only in value, you're absolutely going to leave significant value on the table if you don't have strong sell side representation, but it's also costing you perspective and optionality. But I'll say this, Paul, I mean, I agree. Most brokers, that's why we try not to use the word broker. We use the word sell side advisor to describe what we do because we're far more than just a quote unquote broker. I was a banker for a decade. I worked with all of the dental brokers across the country. There's a reason I became a broker because most of them honestly sucked at their job.
Yeah.
They didn't drive value. They didn't give objective guidance. They didn't put their client's needs before their own. And that's why I became a broker. That's why I became a sell-side advisor to do it differently. And I think our reputation at this point speaks for itself.
I love that answer. And I also just want to add, as someone who's a dentist who owns practices, when it comes time for me to do whatever with them, as someone who's been a transitions advisor, broker, it's an enormous emotional experience and you just can't do it alone. And you need someone who can tell you this is normal, this is not normal. They're asking these questions. This is what you do every day. And I think when it comes to enormous life decisions, make sure you get people who do that thing every day on your side, because you're going to do that just thing once and you don't want to mess up. And you may have seen the other comment was sadly from an older dentist who said, I really missed out by just taking what the DSO said I could get. I realized one of my colleagues got a lot more. So great myth there. Now, how about this myth? You touched on it, but just if you could explore it more, the myth, all DSOs are the same. All DSOs are the same. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so we say this often, if you've met one DSO, you've met one DSO. Now, it is true that most DSOs are backed by some sort of institutional capital, right? And their goal is to turn a profit. Their goal is to build a larger business, buy low and sell high, create arbitrage, create a return for their investors, which also includes doctors, right? Because almost all of these deals are partnership deals. But every DSO, irregardless of the fact that they're backed by some type of institutional capital, and yes, they're in it to make money. By the way, so are most of the dentists and dental nachos. They go to work every day not to run a nonprofit, but to make a nice living and to help people simultaneously. And if you can do both, that's awesome. But every DSO has a different financial sponsor, and those financial sponsors, they raise capital from different types of investors. They have different goals. They have a different outlook as to how they're going to build the business, what types of assets they're going to acquire, and how they're going to manage them. Each DSO is at a different stage in the recapitalization cycle. So some DSOs maybe just hit a recap and are early in a 5 to 6 year cycle. Others are rapidly approaching the tail end of a recap cycle. So that will depend on your upside on the equity component and your hold time to a liquidity event. Every DSO has a different deal structure, where the equity lies. I mean, the equity can lie at the holdco level, the practice level, or a combination of both. And every DSO has a different viewpoint on, how much cash at close versus how much equity versus how much holdback, earn out, earn up is going to be involved in the deal. They all approach valuation a little bit differently. They are all looking for different types of practices and different types of doctors. They have a different culture. They own different assets. They have different management teams. They have a different level of infrastructure and a different approach to how day-to-day functionality and operations are going to look. Some DSOs are very hands-off. Some DSOs are very hands-on, depending on your why. It's going to depend on, which DSO is more attractive to you. So that's why I think it's so important to create optionality. Through creating optionality and dating around and getting to know a lot of different DSOs when you are looking to monetize your business in that world, it's going to provide you with perspective, and it's going to assure that you ultimately land with a DSO that's a good fit for your why, and it's going to be the right partner for you on a go-forward basis. I think a lot of doctors fall into the trap of, my buddy sold to this DSO, so I'm going to sell to the same DSO because they've had a good experience. Well, your buddy might be a different age. They're probably, they have a different personal financial situation. They have a different why. They have a different type of practice. So just thinking that by default, whoever your buddy sold to is going to be a good fit for you, I think is a little naive. And I think, hey, you can give that DSO a seat at the table and allow them to bid on your office, but make sure you fill the other seats at the table, create optionality, create perspective. The only way to do that, in my opinion, is to run what we call a competitive bid process. Take your practice to market in a formal process and bring all the different DSOs to the table that could be a good fit and aggressive in bidding.
I love this, man. I mean, to keep teaching you, hopefully you're getting some value from me on how to talk dentist. In a conversation, you can say, you have two 50-year-old patients come in, Dr. Smith, and they're the same age and they might have the same background, but they can't get the same treatment plan. And dentists would understand that in 2 seconds because it's based on a variety of factors, from their x-rays to their periodontal health to their goals. And I think that what you shared is so key, because it's my friend got this, aren't I going to be able to get this? It's why you need someone on your side, because you may not want this when it comes. I mean, these are things that I've learned from you and talking to people in the space, right? Like the biggest multiple of EBITDA doesn't always mean the best deal, right? Is that accurate?
I would say that deal structure and fit are as important or more important than the initial valuation. I mean, the money always matters, right? But the other things have to be in alignment as well, or you're not going to be happy.
I love that. I want to share with people. We have more people streaming live. Webinar is for you here watching live. Please feel free to put a question in the Q&A. It can be asked anonymously. You have Brannon here with us, for 35 to 45 minutes. Take advantage of that. But the next myth, Brannon, which I like, is DSOs will come in and make a ton of changes to my practice. Their goal is to buy my practice and make a ton of changes. Debunk that myth for us.
There are a handful of DSOs that buy assets that are in duress or that need new direction, and they come in and they do reinvent the wheel, right? They buy low, they're going to reinvent the practice, and then they're going to grow it and eventually sell it in a recap. But the DSOs that we work with, the DSOs that really are known for acquiring practices in today's marketplace, they buy great practices, they partner with great clinicians, and then for the most part, they stay out of the way because they can leverage economies of scale and negotiate better reimbursement rates with payers, better pricing with vendors, and without much effort, significantly increase the profitability of the practice. And by the nature of them being a larger organization, they're going to sell for a higher multiple than your practice will individually. So they can afford to buy your practice for 7-8 times EBITDA, leverage some economies of scale, which do not interrupt your clinical autonomy, right, and increase profitability, and then sell for 12 to 15 times EBITDA at a recap and make a ton of money without reinventing the wheel. So I have never had a client call me and say, post-affiliation, post-close, and say, Brannon, you're not going to believe this. The DSO fired my staff or rebranded my practice, or they've interrupted my clinical autonomy and they won't allow me to use the lab I want to use, or what have you. The DSOs that we work with don't make those types of changes to the practice. They understand that change is the conduit to upsetting the doctor, upsetting the team, and burning their investment to the ground. So the more change the practice goes through, the more turmoil the practice is going to experience from a financial perspective. It's natural to be concerned, and you should be concerned. These should be the type of questions that you ask DSOs as you're in the courting process and you're doing your diligence on them is what will they change? What is going to be different operationally in your practice post sale? Are they going to switch your practice management software? Are they going to make any staff changes? Are they going to, require to use a certain type of supplies or a certain lab or whatever? Ask those questions. You should be concerned about both your clinical and operational autonomy. But the answers that you're going to get in return are exactly as I've just explained, that, hey, doc, we're partnering with you. We're not
Right.
acquiring your business. You know better than anybody what's made you successful and what's going to continue to make this practice successful, to grow and to thrive. We're not going to make unilateral decisions without your blessing.
I love that. I also, my sense is, the corollary to this would be make sure you're asking that they actually will be supporting you. Make sure they will be showing up, right? I think as a dentist, even me, Brandon, I think someone wants to stand over me saying, do a crown instead of a filling, when that's just not the case. But maybe when it comes time to, I need an assistant or I need a hygienist, where are they going to be? And I'm sure you talk with your clients about DSOs that provide support. And that's really, to me, that's one of the things that would be most attractive about partnering with an organization, someone to help you with the hassles that you just don't have the bandwidth for. And then also what you shared, being able to get a cost for things that, why, just for a minute, why can't I get those costs? I got 2 practices, Brandon. Why can't I get these great costs and make my practice profitable? What's this magic sauce the DSO has when I partner with a group that has 150 locations?
You're just too small. I mean, you just don't have the leverage to be able to move the needle with the vendors and the payers the way 100 or 200 location DSO does. I mean, that's how the world works, right? The bigger you are, typically you have the opportunity to throw your weight around and leverage better reimbursement rates with payers, better pricing with vendors. And I do want to touch on, if you've ever heard a story about a DSO that came in and made a lot of changes to a practice and upset the apple cart and pissed off the owner. That is either one of the DSOs that we don't work with because we know that's the way they operate, or the practice was failing. The practice was struggling. So I do want to point out, sometimes when you hear these stories about, oh, a DSO bought my practice and ran into the ground and screwed me over, it's not always the DSO. A lot of times, the real story is the doctors sold the business, monetized it, put a bunch of cash in the bank, took their foot off the gas, took their eye off the ball, and the practice started to tank. And then the
Yeah.
DSO had to assert themselves, as any partner would, even if you were partnered with, you sold equity to an associate, or you partnered with another doctor or your dental school buddy or whatever, they would do the same thing. If you weren't doing what you need to do, the business starts tanking. They're going to lean in and go, hey, what the F is going on? We got to make some changes. And then all of a sudden, the dentist is pissed off because the DSO is asserting themselves, but ultimately it was, them that led to the DSO being forced to lean in and operate the asset because they were checked out.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that, the goals of both the selling dentist and the DSO are on the same page, because we've done previous webinars, we'll do more, maybe might have a few minutes to talk about it, but the goal is to grow it, and there will be that second bite of the apple, maybe I'll ask about at the end. So you are on the same page with your shared goals. And I do want to ask you kind of about an example deal when we get through this myth. So we kind of talked about there's no desire to destroy autonomy. Anything else you want to say about the autonomy part?
I mean, again, the easiest way to burn your investment to the ground, if you're an absentee owner, DSO, private equity investor, is to piss off the dentist. And the easiest way to piss off your dentist is to interrupt their clinical autonomy. Now, from an operational perspective, you now have a partner, right? So if you want to make some big operational change, or, move your office or renovate your office or buy a $200,000 piece of equipment, just as you would if you had a dentist as a partner, yeah, you've got to talk it out and make sure that the ROI is there and everybody's on the same page. But when it comes to clinical autonomy, the last thing they want to do is upset you. And what's going to happen if you're upset? You're not going to be as productive. the staff's not going to be as productive, the patients are going to start leaving, the business is going to fail from a financial standpoint. So DSOs know better than to rape you of your clinical autonomy and to make unilateral operational decisions that are going to impact your day-to-day in a negative way.
The example I like to, this next myth here, equity in a DSO is worthless. Let's walk through an example. I have a $3 million practice. It has $600,000 in EBITDA. I'm not asking you to, like, if you told me your aunt needed implants, you said the dentist is going to place 4 to 6 implants and build screw-in teeth, Paul, and it's going to be $40,000. Does that sound right to you? I'd say, yep, that sounds right to me. You said a dentist is going to place 2 implants and charge my aunt $100,000 for screw-in teeth. I say that doesn't sound right, Brandon. So let's just do an example. There's a $3 million practice, $600,000 in EBITDA. Someone's going to sell it. What type of cash at close are they looking at? Because I want to get to the equity point. You got a $3 million practice, 20% EBITDA, and just in your general, what kind of enterprise value would you get for that?
Yeah, so in that scenario, your enterprise value is going to be probably somewhere in the 4.2 to 4.5 million range,
Gotcha.
and you're going to take 60 to 70% cash at closing.
So let's take to make it easy, the $4 million, and we have 2.4 million at closing. So I got $1.6 million. This is part where, even though as many times I talk to the Brannon Moncriefs of this space, I always could use a refresher. I got $2.4 million. No one can take it from me, right? In general, no. But I now have $1.6 million. Is this called equity? What's this called? And walk us through this.
It could be a combination of things. We try to negotiate a very, very clean deal structure, simply cash and equity if at all possible. And if we have a highly competitive environment, we likely can. Occasionally, there'll be some type of earnout or holdback in combination with the equity that will comprise that 1.6 million. But simple math, all right? $3 million top line revenue, $600,000 in EBITDA. It trades for 4 million. I think it would trade for significantly more than that, but let's just say it's 4 million. 2.4 million cash at close, and then 1.6 million, the remaining value of the business, is going to be in one of 2 forms of equity or a combination of both. You're either going to take that 1.6 million and buy stock in the DSO's parent company, and the value of that stock is going to be determined by where that DSO is in their recap cycle, their growth cycle, what that DSO is currently worth. But the goal is to buy that stock at, let's say, $2 a share. And then
Gotcha.
2 years later, when that DSO hits a recap event, it sells for $4 a share. So you essentially double your money on that equity component. So that 1.6 million is now worth 3.2 million, and you have the option at that recapitalization event to liquidate all or part of that equity. And if you choose not to liquidate all of it, you can roll forward equity into the next recap cycle. So for discussion purposes, right? Let's assume that you buy $1.6 million of stock, and then a couple of years later, the DSO recaps and you hit a 2x return on that stock. And you decide, hey, I'm going to take 50% of that in cash. So it's worth 3.2 million at this point. I'm going to pocket 1.6 million in cash. So now you have the full initial valuation of $4 million in your pocket, and then you roll forward $1.6 million in equity into that next recap cycle. And that's probably going to take 4 to 6 years for you to have the ability to liquidate that equity in part or in full, but it could double or triple in value again, depending on the size of the DSO that you partner with, their financial health, their goals, and what ultimately occurs, in the future from a liquidity and recap standpoint. Now, the other option there is that rather than taking that $1.6 million and buying stock in the DSO's parent company, you actually retain that equity in your own practice. So let's say you took 60% cash at close, 2.4 million, and then you retain 40% equity in your own business. That's real equity at the practice level. You're going to get ongoing pro rata EBITDA distributions commensurate with that equity. So you'll get 40% of the ongoing EBITDA of your practice distributed monthly or quarterly after you pay the DSO's management fee. And that's where you got to look at all the levers involved in the deal. If it's a joint venture deal where you're retaining practice level equity, there's going to be a management fee. You got to unpack, what is that management fee? Is it negotiable? You also got to unpack, is the DSO going to lever the balance sheet of the practice with debt? Because occasionally, we have seen this more frequently, you see DSOs, they have to borrow money to acquire your business, and then they put that debt on the balance sheet of your individual practice, and it erodes your EBITDA distributions. So you have to understand all the different levers involved in the deal. Where does the equity lie? Holding company or practice level? And if it's holding company, where am I entering the recap cycle? What's the projected return on equity? And what's the holding period until you get to the liquidity event? And then if it's joint venture equity, am I going to get prorated EBITDA distributions? What's the management fee? Are you going to burden my balance sheet with debt? But there is risk, right? These are highly leveraged businesses. They're alternative investments. I would argue that I don't know that there's a better risk reward proposition out there. If you've ever invested in private equity backed businesses, which I have outside of the dental space, high risk, high reward. But at least you are part of this business and can move the needle to some degree. And it's a business that you understand, as opposed to, the private equity stuff that I'm invested in, I'm invested in like a robotics roll up, alternative energy fund. I don't have any involvement with those companies, but I'm counting on the investors being a good shepherd of our capital, and the people running those companies doing a good job of growing them and managing them, and eventually exiting them and giving me a nice return at the end of the day. But it is true, in the private equity world, the equity does have risk, but to say that it's worthless is absolutely insane. Because I hear a lot of people say, well, you better just be happy with the cash at close, because the equity, that's never going to come to fruition. Over 200 private equity firms are not investing in DSOs to lose all of their money.
Right.
And the reality is, a lot of them and a lot of doctors have made a ton of money over the past decade. And you're going to see, even though recaps have been muted and delayed because of the high interest rate environment we've been in over the past 24 months, several large DSOs are going to announce recaps in the next 60 days. Multiple medium-sized DSOs are going to announce lucrative recaps in the next 60 days. With the interest rate environment improving, and with the stock market ripping, and more money flowing into private equity, you're going to see a lot of DSOs return to the market and start buying practices. You're going to see renewed private equity interest in our space over the next 6 to 12 months. You're going to see recaps at 12 to 15x that are going to be announced recently. So I think things have turned a little negative over the past 24 months because not many DSOs have recapped, and those recaps that have occurred have been muted to some degree. That's a temporary issue. And most DSOs that have been, struggling, have had to retool their organization. They're going to be stronger coming out of this than they were going into it. They're going to start buying again, and there's going to be an institutional investor on the back end to buy their equity. Not all of them are going to make it. A handful are going to go to zero. A handful are going to lose money. A handful are going to generate a unicorn outcome of 5x return on invested capital. And the remainder are going to fall somewhere in the middle. But even if it's only a 2 or 3x return on a 5-year recap cycle, that's a damn good return comparative to the other assets that you have the opportunity to invest in.
Really awesome breakdown, Brandon. I learned a lot, and I kind of want to, have our final theme with this. But like, one of the things I'll share is the common challenge is, if I had this $3 million practice that had $600,000 in EBITDA, they say, oh, just keep it for 3 more years. Just keep it for 3 more years. Here's one of the things I want to ask about you, because it asks, with this selling to a DSO is a terrible idea. If I keep it for 3 more years, I still got to sell it in those years later to someone else. Explain to this audience why it would be hard to sell a $3 million practice to a 3-year out of dental school person, the person they may have bought the practice from. When does a practice get probably too large to be purchased by another private practice?
once it crosses about $2 million in revenue, the private buyer marketplace shrinks dramatically because there's very few dentists that want to take on that much risk, right? And very few that have the financial backing, the confidence, the competence, the skill set to buy a practice of that caliber. So valuations start to pull back, demand starts to pull back in the private buyer world, whereas it does the opposite in the DSO world. Once you cross about $2 million in revenue, demand skyrockets in the DSO world, and the valuations start to exponentially run away from the valuations in the private buyer world. So it can be very, very challenging to sell a multi-million-dollar revenue business to a third-party dentist. And then you hear, oh, we'll just sell it internally to multiple associates. Oh, yeah, that's easy, right?
Right.
I mean, I have heard plenty of nightmares, so much so that we don't even get involved in partnerships anymore. We used to do it, but the failure rate is so high. But divesting minority equity to multiple partners is very challenging. Getting third-party financing to do so is almost impossible. So you have to basically grow these buyers from the ground up, build them up, mentor them internally, and then take back seller notes for minority equity interest, and then hope that when you're ready to divest yourself of your remaining equity, they're willing and able to buy it.
Right. And also, as somebody who does Dentist Job Connect daily and help watch this world, most of the associates, not all of the associates, but many of the associates who are good associates and good clinical producers would not be super interested in that next step. I mean, there's just a whole world of associates. I talked to one the other day and I said, they're producing $1 million a year and saying, I said, oh, do you ever want to own a practice? I said, nope, I like this life. I like this life. And, that's a whole nother portion too. And the other thing is, what's the energy, like I really want my audience to hear this. They go, just keep it yourself and, hold it longer. My sense is the energy when someone who owns a $3 million practice with $600,000 in EBITDA comes to someone like you, they're ready for a change. They're ready to partner, whether they want to do it for the next decade with DSO X, Y, and Z, or whether they're counting down the days to their 60 months. Just tell us maybe a little bit about that seller mindset.
Yeah, this is what's dangerous about social media is everybody applies their own situation and their own circumstances to other people and tries to give them guidance based on their own very narrow life experience. And I see a lot of this on this group. There's a couple of guys in particular. Hey, you're 40 years old. You own a practice doing $1 million a year. You've got a 20-year runway. You have no plans to exit your business and you're happy managing it. Great. Don't sell it.
Right.
But don't tell somebody that's 55 years old, that's got a $5 million practice, built a beast, right? And now they have limited options. And that practice is worth $12 million in the DSO space versus on a good day, if they could find a buyer, $3.5, $4 million private buyer. You're not in the position to give that person guidance. Right. You have no perspective, right? But I see that a lot in the group. The reality is that a lot of our clients are using a DSO affiliation either for succession planning purposes. They're within that 5-year window of wanting to exit their business. And on a 5-year window with a large practice at a 7x multiple or greater, hands down, almost every single time it makes sense to go the DSO route. They're looking for help from an operational perspective, an administrative perspective, a little bit better work-life balance. Now, I do want to say, if that's what you're looking for and that's your main driver, you got to make sure you pick the right partner that's actually prepared to support you on a day-to-day basis operationally. A lot of our clients are looking to de-risk and help kind of alleviate the stress of carrying debt and then having their business, a business that has a lot of key man risk, and they've got a lot of their net worth tied up in one company, their own company, that's privately held. There's a lot of risk in that.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee that the next 10 years are going to look like the last 10 years, especially as you get closer and closer to the tail end of your career and life can happen, right? So a lot of our clients are looking to de-risk by monetizing a piece of their business, take some chips off the table, and then partner with maybe a larger entity that is better prepared to fight some of the headwinds that private practice is facing and help them manage the business on the day-to-day. Because damn it, they're tired. I mean, they've been at this for 30 years, built a hell of a business, but it's come at a significant cost, physically, emotionally, financially, and they're ready to offload some of that burden.
And, I'll share is the practice can totally feel like maybe you want to call it a golden anchor in your life because you have these teams. It's not like Dental Nachos or McLerran and Associates or Dentist Job Connect. Just use an example where you work in a space where your customers don't come to see you face to face and sit down next to you. And when you're the person running that, what I call dental circuits, it'd be a lot. Well, there's one bonus thing, but before we get to the bonus, Brandon, selling to a DSO is blank idea. It's not a terrible idea. How would you debunk this myth to kind of wrap it up?
Just say it depends. In certain circumstances, it is a terrible idea. I mean, we get on the phone with some clients, even just in a discovery call, don't even have to do evaluation. And I'm like, why are we talking? Did you just have a bad day?
Yeah.
Was Susan at the front desk just being, difficult to deal with today and you're fed up with it? But a lot of times it's like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Like, given your age, given your runway, given the things that keep you up at night, not things that a DSO can solve for, maybe you just need a consultant. Maybe you need an associate. Maybe you need to work on your relationship at home. Like, whatever it might be, the DSO thing's not the right fit. So I think it's very, very situational, and we try to
Brandon,
take a very,
something
very
there that's really
objective approach.
valuable. And I want to compliment you, even though it might come naturally to you as a responsible advisor. There are patients that walk into our chair and say, I want all my teeth extracted. I want dentures because they have a few cavities. And I have to say to them in a kind way, that's not an appropriate plan for you. I refuse to partake in that plan. So even if they were willing to give me the money for this care, and you guys do the exact same thing with dentists, and I just think that's a great person to have on your side where you're going to tell them the real deal. And that's kind of my last question to help us. I want to share that people can email transitions@dentalnachos.com. They can text McLerran to 215-543-6454 to connect with our awesome sponsor for a conversation. But just so I can help my community, just tell us some of the parameters. You've talked about them, and I know they move a little, but like, where does the conversation for revenue of a practice come in for a DSO, and our DSOs pulling back from smaller practices? If we were just giving you the floor, would you say this is 1.5 million and above, 1.2? Because there's plenty of private practices transition, because an $800,000 private practice is not going to be sold to a DSO. So kind of talk us through that to wrap us up.
I don't think it makes any sense to even look at the option if you're doing 1.5 million or less, right? Really, most of our DSO clients are doing revenue of 1.5 million or greater, especially as you start to get in the 3 million, 4 million, 5 million rev range. I mean, you have outkicked your coverage from a private buyer perspective, and it makes a lot of sense to at least understand what your business is worth and what your options are in the DSO world. Or if you're at a point where you're thinking about exiting your business within a certain period of time. So what we've seen is in a lot of areas where there's very transient areas, like I live in Austin. So a lot of people have moved to Austin over the past 10 years that have no roots here. And they built really successful businesses. And then at some point they want to go back home. So then they get within that 5-year window of wanting to relocate, and they've built a large successful business. It makes sense to potentially look at the DSO option, fulfill that post-closing obligation, and then bounce. So I would say that if your business is doing 1.5 million in revenue or greater, it at least makes sense to quantify what is your business worth, what are your options, get educated, and then if we don't talk for another 5 years, that's totally fine. Hit pause on the conversation, and then we can be an advisor to you along the way. Hey, I'm thinking about buying this second office. I'm thinking about dropping this PPO plan. Once I know your business intimately, I can coach you on how does that impact value and marketability on a go-forward basis. And then also life happens. Priorities change. Life changes. Things happen. And if you want to pivot earlier than expected, all right, well, now we know each other. And we can very quickly roll forward that EBITDA and go to market if and when we need to. So I think it's just about getting educated. I think it's just about getting filtering that noise and getting some unbiased guidance on what you have and what your options are as far as where you take it from here.
Love it, Brandon. As always, you share so much value with us. I always learn something. I love these conversations, talking out things. You're helping to recenter some of the social media hysteria, I will call it at times. You've debunked myths, so be proud of yourself for that. Thank you so much for being a partner and sponsor with us, and I look forward to our next one.
Paul, appreciate it. Good to see you. Bye-bye, everybody.